Cristiano Ronaldo, $200 million at Al Nassr. Leo Messi, $60 million at Inter Miami. Karim Benzema, $100 million at Al Hilal. Now, did you know that in the early days of professional football, players earned less than the average factory worker? Or that until the 1960s, there was a strict cap on how much a footballer could earn? Join us as we go through the evolution of a footballer's paycheck, from the humble beginnings of the 19th century to the mega deals of today. Now, at the end of the 19th century, particularly between the formation of the English Football Association in 1863 and the 1880s, football was still in its infancy. Players were primarily amateurs driven by passion rather than profit. Their first salaries, if you could really call them that, were meager stipends barely covering travel expenses and a post-match meal. And we're talking about sums that might make modern players chuckle or even cry. I'm talking about no more than $2 or $3 a day, which is equivalent to roughly $50 to $75 in today's money. Now, it wasn't until the 1880s that clubs such as Preston North End, one of the pioneering professional teams in England, began to pay their players on a weekly basis. This marked the dawn of professionalism in football. By the turn of the 20th century, star players might earn a bit more, but football was really far from a lucrative career. To put it in perspective, even the most talented football players in the era couldn't dream of out-earning respected professionals like teachers, doctors, or lawyers. Which, as you can tell, is a really stark contrast to today's landscape where top footballers often earn more in a week than many of these professionals do in a year. There was a slight increase in salaries in the interwar period of the 20th century, but the first major change came in 1920 with the introduction of the maximum wage, or salary cap, in England. Now, this ceiling limited players' earnings to £8 per week, which was approximately £400 or £500 in today's money. For context, this was still above the average working class wage of the time, but far from the extravagant prices that Cristiano Ronaldo gets paid. The maximum wage remained in place until the 1960s, keeping footballers' wages relatively modest, but also consistent. Players still had other jobs to support themselves, with many working in factories, mines, or running small businesses during the off-season. The maximum wage was essentially an early form of financial regulation, not unlike today's financial fair play rules, but also focused on player salaries rather than club spending. Now, the turning point that marked the beginning of gradual rise in wages came on January 18th, 1961. This was because of the abolition of the salary cap in English football. Now, this watershed moment is remembered as a milestone in modern football, largely due to the tireless efforts of Jimmy Hill, then chairman of the Professional Footballers Association, PFA. Hill, a former player himself, argued passionately that the wage cap was tantamount to slavery and lobbied relentlessly for its removal. His success opened the floodgates for players to negotiate contracts freely, setting the stage for gradual rise in salaries. Fulham's Johnny Haynes became the first £100-a-week player, which equivalates to about £2,300 or $2,900 today, which, in all honesty, is a super significant leap from the previous £20 maximum and an average of £14 per season. This change sent shockwaves through the sport, with other top players quickly following suit and demanding higher wages. Since that momentous decision, players' wages have risen season after season, and in 1968, Manchester United legend George Best, widely regarded as one of Britain's greatest ever players, was reportedly earning £1,000 a week, which was approximately £18,000 or $23,000 in today's money, which was 10 times Haynes' groundbreaking wage just 7 years earlier. The 1970s and 80s saw a further escalation in players' earnings. However, it wasn't the removal of the salary cap that led to higher salaries, but also the factors such as the increased popularity of the sport as a whole. Football was already being actively commercialized, and television rights were becoming more expensive, with media outlets prepared to bid incredibly high to broadcast major league matches and tournaments around the world, which means that the rise of TV football in turn brought more money into the game, benefiting clubs and players all around. Not to mention, sponsorship deals also became more common, with players beginning to earn substantial sums from endorsements. One of the key figures in the rise in salaries during this period was Kevin Keegan, who joined Hamburger SV from Liverpool in 1977. His move highlighted the growing financial power of Europe's big clubs and the increasingly international nature of football. Keegan's salary at Hamburg was reportedly double what he was earning at Anfield, reflecting the wider trend of rising wages. Another player was Diego Armando Maradona, the hand of God himself. At the beginning of the 1980s, Argentines moved to Barcelona in 1982 and then to Napoli in 1984 is a prime illustration of the sharp rise in wages. Now, according to various sources, including the International Business Reports, Maradona's contract with Napoli from 1984 was worth $3 million in monthly salary and up to $10 million in endorsements. Yeah, to put this into perspective, the $13 million he earned each year during his time at the Estadio San Paulo would be worth about $30 million in 2024. Maradona's transfer sums and salaries set new standards and showed how the best players could be rewarded handsomely. Now, this period laid the foundations for the astronomical wages that we see today, as clubs continue to invest heavily in their star players to achieve success both on and off the pitch. So, as we move into the 1990s, the defining moment in football which further influenced wage increases was, of course, the move from the English First Division to the Premier League. The rebranding of the league secured lucrative broadcasting deals, notably with Sky Sports, which pumped huge sums of money into the clubs. From that point on, even the smallest clubs in the Premier League were in a very different financial situation. Now, a prime example of this championship playoff final, dubbed the world's most expensive final, after the winner of every edition of the competition bags over £100 million to compete with the other clubs in the world's top league. This windfall allowed clubs to pay higher wages, attracting top talent from around the world. The 1990s saw the emergence of superstar players whose salaries reflected their status. In 1996, Alan Shearer's move from Blackburn to Newcastle United for a then world record fee of £15 million, about £28 million or $35 million today, highlighted the escalating cost of acquiring world-class players. Footballers' salaries followed suit, which, with stars such as David Beckham and Ronaldo, both at Manchester United, earning substantial sums on and off the pitch from endorsements and media deals. Now, some 25 years after George Best's £1,000 a week in 1992, Liverpool midfielder John Barnes became the first player to earn £10,000 a week. Then, in 2001, when Sol Campbell drew the ire of half of North London when he moved from Tottenham to Arsenal, he was reportedly earning £100,000 a week. This change of more than 10 times in less than 10 years illustrates the rapid escalation of wages during this period. Now, by the end of 2019, the average salary of a Premier League player topped £3 million for the very first time, with at least 500 footballers able to boast such numbers. To be more precise, these wages are probably becoming more and more every time you watch this video. Kinda makes you think, right? Now, the turn of the millennium brought further seismic shifts. The arrival of Roman Abramovich at Chelsea in 2003 was something huge, something that had never happened before in the history of English football. His takeover of the club from businessman Ken Bates revolutionized the financial landscape of the sport. Abramovich's vast wealth allowed Chelsea to outbid rivals for top players, offering salaries previously unheard of in English football. And with this injection of capital, it not only raised the wage ceiling, but also set a new financial standard for financial muscle in the transfer market. In Abramovich's first window alone, he spent £121 million on transfer fees, which is now equivalent to about £200 million or $250 million today. And not to mention, he at least spent as much on wages, bringing in the likes of Joe Cole, Juan Sebastian Veron, Hernan Crespo and Claude Makélélé to make Chelsea one of the most efficient and competitive clubs in England and Europe. However, at the same time as the Russian, another very influential businessman, Florentino Perez, began his huge Galacticos project at Real Madrid, which redefined the economics of football in every department. It all started with Luis Figo in 2000, whose €65 million transfer, about €100 million or $110 million today, was the most expensive at the time. Now, in the years that followed, other superstars such as Zinedine Zidane, Ronaldo, and David Beckham joined the club. Perez's strategy was to acquire the best players in the world in order to boost both sporting success and commercial revenue. And as you can imagine, in the 1970s and 1980s, and even in the last decade of the 20th century, it was absolutely impossible for any businessman in the world to bring the best players from Europe and have the financial capacity to pay both their hefty transfer fees and high salary demands. Yes, it was a pipe dream for many, but Florentino Perez achieved the impossible and joined Abramovich as one of football's juggernauts. And yes, they are both influential in their own way, but the difference between the two is that Abramovich undoubtedly changed the landscape in England, and in particular at Chelsea, who had won their last title more than 30 years before his arrival. Talk about a dry spell. And Florentino Perez, on the other hand, achieved what only the greatest football dreamers could imagine. He set in motion a series of events that were unstoppable. And when we talk about the evolution of wages in the game's recent history, we can't help but mention the influence of another businessman with an obsession for greatness, PSG president Nasser Al-Khelaifi. Since taking over the Parisians in 2011, the Qatari has transformed the club into a footballing powerhouse and put them on the European map in a huge way. The acquisition of superstars such as Neymar and Kylian Mbappe in 2017 for record-breaking transfer fees came with staggering salaries, setting new standards in the sport. Neymar's €222 million move from Barcelona to PSG remains the most expensive transfer in history. His weekly wages of €625,000, about €700,000 or $760,000 today during his 6 years in Paris, along with Mbappe's lucrative contract extensions, illustrate the financial power PSG wields under Al-Khelaifi's leadership. Interestingly, Mbappe's €180 million price tag in 2017 is still the second highest in football history, 7 years after the transfer. And speaking of that time, Mbappe eventually managed to work out his transfer, patiently waiting for his contract to expire before joining Real Madrid as a free agent. With this influx of Qatari wealth, it has not only elevated PSG, but also increased competition across Europe, forcing other clubs to offer even higher wages to attract and retain top talent. While these three influential owners, Abramovich, Perez, and Al-Khelaifi, may be at the heart of making football more of a business than a sport, they can't even match the financial might of the Saudi clubs. Things honestly started getting really out of hand by the end of 2022 when Cristiano Ronaldo signed a $200 million a year contract with Al Nassr, making him the highest paid athlete in history. Subsequently, the Saudi Pro League made headlines in 2023 by securing the transfers of other high-profile players, including Karim Benzema, N'Golo Kante, and Roberto Firmino. These moves highlight a wider trend. Football is becoming increasingly globalized, with emerging markets willing to spend big to attract the best players and even top young talent, which has become more common in the recent years. And yes, there are different opinions about the rising salaries of football. On the one hand, they are already being paid more and more, which suggests that they will perform at an even higher level. On the other side, however, do you think it's normal for an athlete to earn hundreds, if not thousands of times more than some of the world's most respected professions, such as doctors, engineers, or journalists? And also, I'm curious, what other players do you think are going to be paid upwards of $200 million a year in the coming future? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. Also, go ahead and check out some of our latest uploads, and please subscribe to our channel for more related content. I'll see you next time.
Like and subscribe.